Good day, everybody. We are very happy to welcome everyone here who is joining us on Zoom or on Facebook or YouTube, where you see us. Today, we are going to discuss a very hot topic everywhere within Europe and actually in Ukraine, and not only in Europe. But first, I would like to know that this event is organized by Vox Ukraine and Promote Ukraine. And my name is Yulia Mincheva, and usually I have only like few words to describe what Vox Ukraine is doing here, but today I am promoted to be a moderator of the discussion and will be with you for the next hour with our honored speakers. So Vox Ukraine is an independent analytical platform, and we strive to help Ukraine modernize the economy and go through this reform path. And we are very happy to have such a partner in Brussels, Promote Ukraine, which aims at like boosting discussion between European and Ukrainian experts and think tanks and politicians. And today we will discuss very hot and prominent topic, the European Green Deal. And it's the most comprehensive and ambitious climate and environmental protection program that was actually launched not far away by the European Union. And it takes to be a climate neutral continent. At the same time, this Green Deal will transform the economy in a social and ecologically way. But the policy that is meant to be very good might create more obstacles on the way to a sound economic development. And actually today we would like to discuss these obstacles and to talk more about the elaboration, implementation of the Green Deal and the consequences that different stakeholders within Ukraine and within the European Union face. So I encourage you to ask your questions in a comment or to raise hand or to write down it in chat right now if you are in Zoom with us. We will have very interactional discussion, and I hope that we will cover as many of your questions here. Now I will just announce our prominent panelists. I'm very happy and appreciate that you find time to join us here. We will discuss this central project of the European Union for the next years with Lesya Nedelku. She is assistant to Jerzy Buzek from European Parliament. Shall I have her accredited assistant to Tiemo Worken? I'm sorry if I doesn't pronounce right the surnames. I will double check through the discussion. He is member of European Parliament. Ina Sovson, member of Ukrainian Parliament from Holos Party. Darina Kulaga, she is senior expert, Green Deal expert at the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. Veronika Movchan will join us in a minute. She is academic director, head of the Center of Economic Studies at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting in Ukraine. And Marina Yaroshevich, our partner from Promote Ukraine, Belgium. So to begin with, I would like to give floor to Pani Lesya and Mr. Charlie. Please, Pani Lesya, tell us more and briefly actually about the political economic debate that going on in Brussels regarding the Green Deal, and actually is Europe on track to become the first climate neutral continent? Can you reflect on it, please? So the floor is yours, and join us.
Yes, hello. Hello to everybody. Thank you to organizers for the invitation. Thank you for those who are present with us virtually behind their screens. So once again, my name is Lesya Nedelku. I work in the European Parliament. I'm advising Mr. Jerzy Buzek on foreign affairs and on energy policy. And Mr. Buzek is a former president of the European Parliament, committee chair of Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. And first and foremost, he is a big supporter of Ukraine and promoter of Ukrainian interests in European Parliament. But today I will speak about the European Green Deal, of course, and present you from the perspective of the committee which I follow, which is Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. And I will show you what's on the table in this committee and what are the future steps so that Ukrainian audience might understand it better. Just to start with, just a brief excursion, so to say, in the past, the year 2019, the elections in the European Parliament, the new commission of Ursula von der Leyen has been established, and this new commission has 6 new priorities, political priorities, with the European Green Deal being one of the most important of them. So what is the European Green Deal? This is a new growth strategy for the European Union, the strategy for development and for reaching its goal. And the goal is the climate neutrality by 2050. But how do we reach this goal? We reach the goal in a sustainable way, in the way where growth is decoupled from resources use. So this is the background. And what happened at the end of 2019, the European Commission came up with the European Green Proposal. It kind of laid out the general framework, the strategy, but then you need to fill in the strategy with the content. And that's why, starting from January 2020, the European Commission was coming up with a number of legislative proposals. And when I was talking to my colleagues, even those people who were supposedly following the European Green Deal back then, for them it was just about phasing out fossil fuels at that point of time. But now the understanding has changed, and of course it's a huge difference, because more and more people understand that the European Green Deal is about basically everything, because this is the strategy which encompasses not only phasing out coal or fossil fuels, but it's also about agricultural policy, it's about transport, it's about sustainable industry. So basically there are 9 policy areas which is covering. And as I was saying, there is clean energy in it, and also there is one about climate action. So in order to implement the European Green Deal in all these 9 policy areas, the European Commission came up with a number of legislative proposals. I will just name a couple of them to give you a taste of the variety of fields it covered, and how much it could fit in the general framework of the European Green Deal, and how much it might be relevant to Ukraine. First of all, I would like to mention the just transition mechanism. This is something which is very close to heart to Mr. Buzek, because he was the initiator of the proposal, and we were very happy to see that after years of discussion, finally, last May, this proposal has become the reality. 17 billion euros of the Just Transition Fund will be available to the coal and carbon intensive regions in the EU member states. It's a big achievement. It's a big concrete step to help those who really need to implement the transition, and without leaving them behind, offering them an alternative. So in addition to the Just Transition mechanism, there are, of course, many other legislative initiatives. I will just name them. So it's Circular Economy Action Plan, a Farm to Fork strategy. There are more specified initiatives, European Battery Alliance. I think that there will be afterwards a possibility for my colleague from the European Parliament coming from another committee, Andy, to talk about it. And I think that he could explain you some of them more in detail. The recent proposals were covering, for example, Zero Pollution Action Plan and Sustainable Blue Economy. As you see, the variety of topics covered is really big, but there is one document which for me stands out, and this document is called the European Climate Law. So basically, this is a commitment from the European Union to become climate neutral, and it's a legal commitment. So you move from the political field where you wish to implement something to a legal field where you commit to do it and it's your obligation. And there is also one major change which was brought about by the law, and it's a change of intermediary goal of 2030 intermediary goal. And it was an increase from 40% target of cutting carbon emissions to 55%. That's a big change for industry, it's a big change for everybody. And therefore, again, the European Commission is coming up with a set of legislative proposals to make this 55 a reality. The proposal will be called Fit for 55. It will be officially presented on the 14th of July. And it will cover a very, very big number of topics. I will just name a couple of them again. It will be the revision of the emission trading scheme. It will be the revision of the renewables directive, revision of the energy efficiency. There will be legislation on energy taxation, development of alternative fuels, and so on. But there will be one document which will be of particular interest for Ukraine. This is, of course, the so-called cross-border adjustment mechanism. This is something which Ukraine, I imagine, is very closely following already and will follow in the future. And I will stop here talking about the legislation. Just a brief comment about one aspect of the European Green Deal, which is relevant for this discussion. It's climate diplomacy, because the European Green Deal has as a part of it in international action on climate change. So the whole idea behind is to lead by the example, which in practical terms means if the European Union is able to combine the economic growth, recovery, creating of future-proof jobs, and sustainable economy on one hand, and on the other, you guarantee the climate protection, environment, and future to your children, it means you are a success story and the others will follow. And that's why I think it's very important for the EU to succeed, because if it fails, the price is very high. And it's not only that it fails yet another growth strategy, it fails on the future of the next generations. And luckily, there are other at the table now with the European Union. And this is, of course, the United States, the Biden administration, which rejoined the Paris Agreement. There are now a number of events happening where the climate change will be very high on the agenda, including today, G7 summit, and then the Glasgow COP meeting. And I think that it will be pushed further, and luckily EU is not alone. Just to finalize, I'll give you another concrete example of this global cooperation. It was the 26th of May summit between the EU and Japan. During this summit, the two parties have concluded the Green Alliance. So it's a commitment on both sides to reach the climate neutrality by 2050. And I think it's a very concrete global action on important economic powers. So I'll finish here. I'm happy to take your questions afterwards, and I will leave the possibility for others to present their points.
Thank you, Penelesa. We will proceed with questions in Q&A. I guess it will be like much easier to join them all because there's a lot of questions I guess other speakers will cover in their speeches. So I would like to ask Charlie to join us and tell us about your reflections from the side of different committee in the first place. And actually, I also would like to ask you maybe to comment how COVID outbreak affects the Green Deal. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, because actually I am personally very fascinated in how the world unites in this war from COVID, and I guess it's bring me hope that we can unite in a better for a better Green Deal implementation here with not only within Europe but within the whole world. So, Charlie, the floor is yours. Please elaborate. And actually, I have one more question. Could you please tell us about this debate regarding the European Green Deal beyond the EU, on maybe including Ukraine and other countries which are not members, which Penelesa started to point important projects for us. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. I hope you can hear me clear and well.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a bit of a lag in the video, but yeah, so thanks a lot for the invitation to this event on that very interesting topic. And Lesja has already mentioned a lot of things about the Green Deal, and I will delve a bit more into it from the Environmental Committee perspective. The questions you just asked, I will elaborate a bit on the end of my first remarks, but I would add a bit on outlining the general dimensions of the Green Deal. So as I said, while Lesja's MEP Buzek, he's working in the Industry Committee. My MEP Timo Wolken from Germany, Social Democrat, he's working in the Environmental Committee. which is in the center of the climate legislation. Especially the climate law was negotiated mainly in the Environment Committee, and we are just about to finalize it in the next plenary session. It will be adopted, so I can give a bit of an angle on that slightly different perspective, while our committees are, of course, working together on a number of issues also in the upcoming legislation. First, I want to point out where we are, or describe a bit the conditions we are in right now concerning our climate relevant emissions. Is the EU on track to become the first climate neutral continent? If you look at the emissions, we're not there yet, not even on the trajectory. On a trajectory that leads us to carbon or carbon neutral economy, greenhouse gas neutral economy by 2050. I would just share my screen for showing the numbers where we're at. I hope that works. Okay, I think it doesn't work.
Not yet, but let's. Oh, you can do it, or maybe not.
I can do it. Okay.
You can, but we can't. Oh, yeah.
Can you see it?
Yeah, it's time.
Great.
Great.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So that is this is numbers from the European Environmental Agency on greenhouse gas emissions in the EU from different sectors, and you can see the numbers start in 1990 and go until 2018, and this is almost half of the way until 2050, where we'll be in 30 years. So it's 30 years from now. Before now, we start counting. 30 years from now, we have to be at net zero. And we can see that regarding energy supply, which is the biggest source of emissions, we have gone some way, but also there, not yet at half of the way, which we should have until 2050. Also in industry, we have achieved some emission reductions, and both is to quite big part, or to some degree, let's say, thanks to the European emissions trading scheme, which is applying to both sectors. But in other sectors and other emission areas, we see that we even have increasing emissions, for example, in transport, also in agriculture, in residential commercial heating, we have decreasing or stagnating emissions. So we have some way to go. And this is why the European Commission proposed the Green Deal with the cornerstone of the climate law and the cornerstone of the ambition getting net zero in 2050. And as Alessia also mentioned, increasing the 2030 emissions target. This is an overview of the European Green Deal. And you see that it stands on a number of pillars. So achieving climate neutrality, that is the thing we're talking about right now. Clean, reliable and affordable energy, that is also something that is connected to this issue. Also sustainable transport and financing the transition are issues that we are talking right now. And there are other pillars which are connected to it, like a transition to a circular economy, zero pollution Europe, where we also talk about health impacts from, for example, air pollution or also water pollution, the agricultural industry or strategy, and so on. So there are a number of issues connected in the Green Deal. And I'll stop sharing my screen here and add a bit on that. Oh, and have to restart my video. There you go. And I'll add a bit on the package that is upcoming on 14th of July that Alessia already mentioned. This is the biggest climate package that was ever planned on European level. It is overhauling most of the European climate legislation. As I said, revising the emissions trading system directive, introducing possibly new elements in emissions trading, the legislation on sinks, on land use change, and so on, effort sharing, renewable energy directive, and a number of transport elements. So we have overall 11 legislative proposals on the table on the 14th of July. And at the same time, the Commission will also propose the new own resources decision. So we will also then talk about what of the income of especially the emissions trading system will go to the EU general budget. How will that all fall together? And maybe that's a good that's the good opportunity for responding to your questions on COVID. I would see two main points that are important here. One is the question that was a bit hanging around in like last spring, when there was a lot of uncertainty, economic crisis. People were not sure about their own lives, about how economy will proceed, and so on. We had a bit of a discussion, which I would say is a bit an old discussion, that trade-off between climate, environment, and the economy. And people were saying, okay, can we still focus on climate? Do we still have the money to reduce our emissions, and so on? But the Commission was, especially Franz Timmermans, the responsible vice president of the Commission, was very adamant in going out and saying, this is not a trade-off discussion, it's a win-win, and we have to do both. We have to do the necessary transitions and overcome the crisis at the same time. And that is the second point I want to raise. We have seen the nascent of something new, the Next Generation EU fund, which is the biggest fund ever created by the European Union, created and repaid by own resources. So this is a paradigm shift that can help also in giving the European Union's institutions more leeway to actually set the scene and moderate the transition. The member states have handed in all their recovery plans now, and we will see that is, of course, also important for the national dimension of the climate transitions. There was the binding goal of 37% climate relevant disbursements within the national recovery plan. So that is also, of course, very, very relevant, because we're talking about a lot of money here. About the external dimensions, I just want to briefly point out maybe one area that we have been working on in the Environment Committee also. Actually, there the Industry Committee was the lead committee, but we've worked on the environment angle, which is the hydrogen strategy of the European Union. The Commission has proposed a hydrogen strategy in, I think it was May 2020, so just a year ago, and the European Parliament in the plenary session of May 2021 has adopted a resolution on that hydrogen strategy of the European Union. Hydrogen is very important for a number of areas. If that's of interest, I can delve into that a bit more later. But I want just to say one thing on the external dimension. The EU won't be able to produce all of its hydrogen alone. That is not a big problem in my eyes from European Union point of view, because nowadays we are not producing all of our oil, not all of our gas, we're importing. The EU is very conscious that we'll have to import. In the Commission's hydrogen strategy, we have the goal of 40 gigawatt of hydrogen capacity in 2030 within the EU. And at the same time, we're planning, or the Commission is planning, with 32 gigawatt import capacity of hydrogen. And they are naming also the Eastern Neighborhood Policy as an instrument in creating those partnerships. Just one last remark on where the Parliament stands on that. I think the Parliament is very positive about those opportunities, but is putting some conditions also to the import, for making sure that the partnering regions are also actually profiting from those partnerships. I want to say it from the resolution that the Parliament has adopted. The Parliament stated that it calls on the Commission and Member States to engage in open and constructive dialogue in order to establish mutually beneficial cooperation and partnerships with neighboring regions, such as North Africa, Middle East, and the Eastern Partnership. And the countries and safeguarding the EU's strategic interest, and that's important, the energy security of both the EU and its partners. And also stress the need to avoid relocation of environmental impacts to partnership countries, and including greenhouse gas emissions, and to delay the decarbonization of the power grid in non-EU countries. For the Ukraine, that's meaning, of course, that the decarbonization of the Ukrainian economy should not be delayed by producing hydrogen, because hydrogen is very power consuming. So that is one thing to bear in mind. Opportunities, yes, but we need additional renewable energy. And with that, I would end my first remarks, and I'm happy for this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for such a structured and detailed, short and briefly overview of what's going on in Environmental Committee within the European Parliament. And we will just go and ask Missina Sosson to elaborate on what's going on Ukrainian side and how you can reflect on all this Green Deal initiative within the Ukrainian Parliament. So the floor is yours. Please join us.
Thank you, Julia. I've been listening to our colleagues from the EU side, and they've given presentations, and they have the numbers in place and everything else. And then now reflecting upon what is happening in terms of the Green Deal in Ukraine, my remarks would be more on the political side of things. For one thing is because Ukraine is very far from yet having any specific numbers or any specific plans in place. So I would, I first of all want to thank Julia and Vox team in general for initiating this discussion and this debate, because it's one of the first things I wanted to say about debating Green Deal in Ukraine is that we are on the very early stage of actually realizing what does that mean, and how should Ukraine work on that. And I think in Ukraine, and that is my point number one, is we are still structuring the Green Deal debate around all things green, any issues related to environment are considered related to climate change and combating climate change, which is not so, and we should not be actually limiting ourselves to only environmental issues, because to a very big extent, Green Deal is about economy, actually much more than about environment. But in Ukraine, particularly in the Ukrainian parliament, when we speak about Green Deal, people typically think that this is the environmental committee and they should deal with that. And that is not something that we are seeing, throughout the workings of all the other committees, including my committee on energy, which actually does not focus so much on the Green Deal. And this is not something, the subject that comes up very often in the Ukrainian political debate. So I think point number one is that we should really speak more precisely and more in depth about what does the Green Deal mean for Ukraine, because currently the debate is very poorly informed and very poorly structured, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And events like this are actually the way to address this problem, that for Ukraine is just something far away and too vague for getting down to specifics. Issue number two, when we speak about the politics of the Green Deal in Ukraine, is of course that every time you mention Green Deal for Ukraine, the argument I hear against it most often is that we are too poor to talk about Green Deal, which to an extent could actually be true, because when Pani Lesia was talking about the just transition and the efforts that the EU is making in terms of just transition, Ukraine does not really have political will, and that is another part of the problem, but also the money that is needed for the just transition in order to shut down the mines and get transferred to other economic enterprises in the areas where mines are the major employment. So the money is an issue for Ukraine, and in Ukrainian political debates that is the subject that comes up very often. It's like, do we have the money for the Green Deal? Well, my argument is of course that we are too poor not to invest in that, because then we'll get even poorer in 10 or 15 years. But point number three is that Green Deal is a very large-scale project. It's a very long-term project. And in Ukraine, the tradition of long-term planning is not there. That is, Ukrainian political debates are structured via the issues of a day, like what do we discuss today? And when we talk about what we need to achieve by 2030, that is such a long time horizon for Ukrainian politics that we don't even go there very often. And that is again a problem in terms of political debates around the Green Deal. We don't go there, we don't get that far and that deep. Issue number four, Ukraine, of course, is very inefficient economically, and Ukrainian economics is being largely monopolized by large economic groups. Well, we call them oligarchs in Ukraine. You can call them whatever you want, but they're the major players in place, and they are the major stakeholders that we have to deal with when debating climate change. That is something that I'm definitely seeing in the workings of the Energy Committee, is how powerful those groups are, how much influence they have on the decision-making process. And well, many of them at this point of time do realize that Green Deal is inevitable, but they are still making large efforts to make sure that the public funding will be basically the single source of financing the Green Deal for Ukraine. And any debates on even raising the carbon tax in Ukraine, which is ridiculously low. Like in Ukraine, carbon tax is super low, and it's unacceptable how low it is. And we really need to do something about it. But even that debate is well, we have this debate. There are some pieces of legislation that are being initiated in order to increase the carbon tax. But well, those debates are basically being blocked in the parliament by the major groups, because they say, like, okay, what are we going to get instead of that? If we pay more money as carbon tax, then we're going to need the money back to reinvest in our companies to make them greener or whatever. And that is one of the ways of doing that. But then we add factor number 5 is, of course, corruption. Which is also another impediment for realizing any Green Deal initiatives for Ukraine. Okay, if we give money to industry back in terms of, so that they can reinvest and introduce some, green technologies and change their infrastructure and all, how do we redistribute that money back to companies? How do we select those companies? How do we make sure that they don't just, use up the money to how do we make sure that the money they get back, or as some sort of support from the government, that they're actually being used to introduce green technologies? And corruption is a great impediment in those terms, like, which, well, for many other reforms in Ukraine, but particularly for such large scale things like the Green Deal. Point number 6, 5, 6. 6. Okay, I'm doing right. Is the decision-making infrastructure for Green Deal in Ukraine is also on the very early stages of development. Like it's very unclear who in the government is responsible for the Green Deal. On the one side, we do have the Vice Prime Minister on European integration, and she's of course the major person, the major stakeholder who is responsible for negotiating the terms of the, how Ukraine fits into the Ukrainian Green Deal. But her side of job, of course, is more like international cooperation. But there is not a single person who's responsible on introducing green policies inside Ukraine. So we have someone who is the face of the Green Deal in Ukraine for our international partners, but we don't really have someone who's responsible for that inside the government. Well, again, some would say that it's the Minister of Environment who's responsible for that, but then, okay, there is also the role of the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Economics, the Minister of Infrastructure, and so on and so forth. They should be there as well. So one of the things that is being debated is whether we should actually introduce the position of the Vice Prime Minister for Green Deal, or green transition, or whatever you call it. I'm not sure that is the best way forward, but I'm just at this point, I'm just pointing to the problem that we don't really have the decision-making infrastructure in place that will make Green Deal possible for Ukraine. There is no one, streamlining those issues for within the Ukrainian government. And then, of course, we formulate positions for our international partners, but how we make things happen here in Ukraine is very, very unclear. And because of that, also, even in negotiating with the European Union on the Green Deal, there come to be some problematic issues. For instance, right now, Ukraine has announced that we want to join the Green Deal as a partner for the European Union. On the other hand, one of the major steps that everyone in the parliament is interested in is the conditions on which Ukraine will, join this train. And one of the major issues is, of course, the cross-border carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM. And for the time being, the position of the Ukrainian government, and I've talked a lot about that with the Vice Prime Minister on European integration, but Ukrainian position is that we need to make sure that CBAM is not applied to Ukraine. And that is the current position of the government, which I do find myself very problematic. The argument of the government currently is that it goes against the agreements that we have with the European Union in terms of trade, that is against the WTO standards. And I can see how you can potentially make this argument in terms of legal, debate. But politically speaking, I think that this could be the only mechanism we can have in order to make things happen in Ukraine, because CBAM is actually the single issue that the industries are actually concerned about, because they know they can, get things done here in Ukraine so that they don't have to get anything done. But CBAM is something that they cannot escape. And that is why they're putting so much pressure on making sure Ukraine does not, that CBAM is not applied to Ukraine. And that is a problem. So like Ukraine is talking a lot about how we want to join the Green Deal, but then when you go down deeper into the details, then you see that actually the position is much more problematic and not so clear. So just making sure I think that would be my my initial remarks. And
thank you for such a frank, view from within the government parliament. And now we will pass the word to Darina Kulaga and hear about this process within the government of Ukraine. Darina Kulaga is senior Green Deal expert at the Cabinet of Ministry of Ukraine, and she works with Olga Stefanishyna, Deputy Prime Minister for Europe and Atlantic integration. Could you please reflect on what you've heard from the members of parliament side? I guess you are very good about this issue, but how we will handle it and how we'll tackle it. Please, the floor is yours. I know you have presentation with slides and numbers, and I guess it puts a little light on the situation. So please, Ksenia, can you help me with sharing the presentation here? Please or not. Give us a second. I'm sorry for this. Sorry, we didn't have such problem 40 minutes ago, but now we have. Still not working, but I hope it will be soon. But now I can engage you and encourage you to ask your questions within chat, or maybe raise your hand. We have such unfortunate technical issue with your presentation here, which everyone is eager to see. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Секундочку, зараз 1 minute I will share the presentation.
Yeah. Vitaly, please save us. Oh, yeah, we are safe. So,
can you move to
one more time, Green Deal and Ukraine.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me. First of all, I have to apologize if there are any background noises. I guess it's cons of work from home. I'll talk a little bit about the internal, maybe some governmental perspective, and give some update on the work of the government, on the Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishyna, with who I work. So next slide, please. From my experience, climate change has definitely moved higher in the agenda of the government over the past year. And so we can see it based on the fact that we have a date of reaching carbon neutrality, which is no later than 2060, as was defined in the National Economic Strategy. And also there is a draft NDC, second NDC discussed, which is kind of ambitious, but it's not approved yet. So there is some sort of ambition to be an early bird in terms of aligning our course with the European Green Deal. But so we cannot become a part of the European Green Deal because we're not a member state. But what we can do is to synchronize our policies. And so for that, we would need our own path of decarbonizing the economy. And we can see that more stakeholders have a growing understanding of the necessity to account for climate change. So I would say that compared to the first NDC, there already is lots of progress because there is interest. We have an ambitious goal suggested. And no matter what goal is finally adopted, I guess many stakeholders will start to account for climate change risks much more. So what the government is doing, there are several things, and one of them is the Interagency Working Group on Climate Change. And one of the panelists was talking about the need for climate diplomacy. And so the work of this group can be the basis for this diplomacy because climate change is a very cross-sectoral issue. And you can see that in many countries who are leaders in climate, they have either some separate position for climate change in the government or some separate agency that's working on it. So this working group performs such functions because it coordinates the ministries. And at the meetings, they can discuss some challenges, opportunities, some threats, and some hot topics within the climate change direction and the European Green Deal. So at the meeting in the early 2021, the group defined some priority areas. They later became the basis for the group of the Green Deal Task Force. Next slide, please. And so that's a bilateral group between the EU and Ukraine, and its task is to develop partnerships between the European Union and Ukraine within the European Green Deal course. And the first offline meeting was held in May, and some of the flagship initiatives were discussed. And among them is the climate governance architecture, so kind of a set of policies needed. Oh, previous, yes. Previous slide. Thank you. Financing, CBAM, potential EU funding for Ukraine, reforestation, and so on. And so I would like to highlight a few of them. So, of course, one of the most pressing issues, and in light of the NDC especially, is financing. So Ukraine has some ambitions, but this issue is raised by many stakeholders because it was estimated that the second NDC of 65% may cost around 100 billion euros up to 2030. So on the one hand, it's a lot, and we can see that many European countries get support from the EU budget. So for example, Poland, who is heavily reliant on coal, and will use funds from structural funds of the EU. And even countries that are not members of the EU, so Western Balkans, for example, they still get support. So they will get around 9 billion euros and up to 20 of investment guarantees. So Ukraine does not get the support needed, which is compatible to the size of its economy and to its needs to decarbonize. So there is a plan of the Deputy Prime Minister to create a new fund that would accumulate the support from international partners, and then we distribute it to climate projects and policies. So that's something that's currently under discussion and in the part of the dialogue. But of course, it's also the question of internal priorities and choices that we make, because it's clear that all this amount will not come from international donors. And a part of these funds, large part, will be capital investments that will be made anyway. So we need government policies to incentivize businesses, and we need businesses to prioritize this as well. So the example is the priority of the EU to have a green post-COVID recovery and to direct 37% of funds to climate projects. So we need something similar in Ukraine as well. And so the goal of this effort is to get prepared for changes, because Green Deal presents both opportunities and threats, and we want to be part of the solution, as an example with hydrogen, but we want to move in the same direction with the EU, and that's the case of the NDC, because it's in fact quite a moderate reduction compared to the current level, but it demonstrates that we are on the same page and that we are sharing the goal of reaching carbon neutral Europe. So, and talking about challenges, next slide, please. One of them is obviously CBAM, and here that's the issue where the government and businesses have a common position, because CBAM is a threat for our exporters. And so there was a CBAM working group created, and the goal is to deliver the position and views of the Ukrainian government in terms of CBAM to the European Commission and to the EU in general, while the CBAM is in development. And so there have been a number of technical consultations so far, and also there was a separate meeting with DG TechSud in May in Brussels. And so a few signals that we received. And I also would say that probably the goal of Ukraine is not to get a complete waiver, but to get some preferential treatment that would account both for direct carbon pricing and for other climate policies, because that's an issue as well. And the EU will be working to account for third countries' climate policies as well. So they'll be working on some equivalency. After there is the first draft of CBAM, there will be some implementing acts. And so there will be some methodology to account for other climate policies except for ETS and except for carbon tax. And so that's something where Ukraine could have a say. And so I guess that's what the working group will be working on in the future. I guess many of you have already seen the leaked draft on CBAM. There are many interesting things there, but of course it's quite broad yet. There are several important moments there. One of them is that countries will have the opportunity to verify that their energy mix has lower carbon intensity than the default value. And I think that will be the case of Ukraine, because we have lots of nuclear, we have renewable energy, and that will definitely be lower than the default value, because the default value will be based on fossil fuels carbon intensity. So to finalize, EU, of course, will have an impact on us in any case, because at some point it will be part of our obligations under the association agreement, because sooner or later it will be updated. But also it will have impacts in terms of financing, because EU is developing sustainable finance taxonomy, and it will unlock additional investments and prevent greenwashing, and that will impact Ukraine as well. EIB is becoming a climate bank, EBRD is aligning its investments with the Paris Agreement. So in terms of international financing, that will there will be some shift within the following years. But also, so Ukraine has ambitions, but it needs some support as well, both political and financial. And yeah, I hope to have more discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I have one discussion, one question from our speakers right now. I will ask you, and then we go to Ms. Veronika. We have a question. What should be the instruments of financial and political support from the EU in order for Ukraine to move with the Green Deal? On what you can elaborate on this, maybe right now, or we can do it with all the panelists afterwards. But probably, and there, yeah, you have another question. Should this support be bound to any kind of conditionally? And if yes, which exactly? So what the perspective from Ukrainian government on financial and political support?
So I guess politically, there will definitely be support from the EU because it claimed the goal of reaching climate neutral Europe, and there is understanding that Europe is not just the EU. Ukraine is a large country with substantial amount of emissions, so there will definitely be political support. It was agreed that there will be separate meetings where the EU will present the financial instruments that will be available for Ukraine as well, and for other third countries in terms of their next budget and in terms of the EU Green Deal course. So that's something that will be developed, and but generally we received a signal that there will be financial support. So for example, one of the instruments is the EFSD+, External Fund for Sustainable Development, if I'm not mistaken. So that will be one of the things, and a couple of more instruments will be coming. And sorry, because of the noise, I didn't hear well your second question, so if you could say it again.
It's more about conditionality. Should the support be born to any kind of conditions? And if yes, which exactly?
So I think, and that will be just my thoughts on this. We have not received anything like that direct as specific conditions so far. But I think if any support will be given, it will be strictly regulated. So if it's some fund, then there will be external board members and the clear governance structure and transparency and the clear criteria set. So I don't think that it'll be a fund that will give support to businesses only, because that can be interpreted as subsidies, for example. And I don't think that the EU would like to support only Ukrainian businesses. But so if it's a fund, it will have some directions, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 8, maybe 10, which will be more or less equally supported. And businesses may be one of them, but not the main one. And so, yeah, if such fund is developed, I guess that international experts, including the EU, will be attracted to its development as well. But that's, again, that's my opinion, because there is no set final design of the fund yet.
Thank you. And now it's time to listen to Veronika Movchan. She's Academic Director at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. She will tell us how to make Green Deal a win-win, not trade-off for Ukraine. And actually, I love to highlight that Ukraine has decarbonized its economy in the 1990s before it becomes a mainstream. And please, Ms. Veronika, tell us more how this Green Deal will affect the Ukrainian economy and which challenges and opportunities we face within the economic point of view. The floor is yours. Please join us.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you, everybody. It's extremely interesting discussion. I'm very sorry that I was not able to join on time, but I'm happy that I listened most of the presentations. Basically, I want to start from the reflecting of the phrase of Ina Savsun that we still consider environment and economy as two different spheres. I think we should learn in Ukraine and probably globally that from now on, environment is definitely about economy. Because if we want to be sure that we save the planet, we need to add money dimension and what is happening to the environmental protection. It's one of the stimulus that works. And the Green Deal shows a great example of that because it is extremely multifaceted. It covers very many areas of economy. We already mentioned energy, which is one of the very obvious parts. This renewable energy, this production of hydrocarbon, but it's also transport. Emissions and transport will be a big topic. It's a very favorite in Ukraine topic of visa-free for industrial products or for more standard for EU. It's ACAA, Agreement on Conformity Assessment and Acceptance of Industrial Products. Already in the first report of the expert mission, the eco-design and energy consumption has been mentioned as the important part of technical regulations that have to be included into the ACA to make it effective, and also it will mean actually implementation of the Green Deal or aligning or whatever you want to call it. Agriculture, organic production is the topic, and if you compare Ukraine and European Union, according to the information that they have, the land used by organic production in EU is reaching almost a quarter, while in Ukraine it's only a couple of percentage points. So we still have a huge opportunities for development here. And we can public procurement, green public procurement is the topic, and it's becoming more and more clear that then we are talking about efficient use of money. We should not focus on the efficient use of money now in this current point of time. It should be the whole life cycle of the product, including side effects, externalities, frequently negative externalities, that will be then covered from the budget. And then if we calculate the actual current value of these products, given the whole life cycle, the green public procurement would not be as inefficient in terms of money as we would think if we look just at the immediate price. The same concerns international trade. Already this sustainable development goals, it became obvious that the fully liberal approach to international trade, that we are thinking about fast and effective and barrier-free trade per se, is not a mainstream anymore. Being a liberal trade economist myself, for me, it's still hard to accept fully, but basically international trade is now, in addition to general aim for more efficient and low barrier trade, is aiming more environmental friendly trade, and all other dimensions, gender, non-discrimination, etc., that added. But for Green Deal, we think about environment, and the impact of the CBAM is exactly about this. So we have basically Green Deal makes for Ukraine, because Ukraine is aiming to become a member of the European Union. We are the European country, and we cannot avoid this topic, whatever we want or do not want to do. And we said that we actually support this goal. So basically, economy is environment. It's the formula and paradigm in which we will live in the future, even if we are not fully ready now. Currently, the figures are not very favorable for Ukraine. I found very few of them. For example, energy intensity in Ukraine, its figures for 2018, I am not sure that it changed a lot. It's changing, but not so quickly. That Ukraine has about 180 kilos per $1,000 in PPP, that is PPP terms, while EU is 83, so it's twice less. And if we're talking about carbon intensity, despite a bit forced decarbonization in 90s, Ukraine has over 600 kilos of CO2 per $1,000 of dollars of PPP in GDP, while Europe has 200, only 200, so 3 times less. And the parity is definitely not in favor of Ukraine. We can talk that GDP is also non-comparable, but still the economy, the pressure of carbon per unit of value added produced in the economy is definitely much higher in Ukraine still. And yes, the Green Deal will create important gains and benefits for Ukraine. But I'm afraid that if we look at the timeline and talk about when we will have costs and when we will have benefits, I'm afraid that costs will be front-loaded mostly, while benefits will be over the life cycle, actually generations. It's still very important, because if we ruin the earth, and I'm sorry for being so pathetic, but it seems that we are approaching this. We have to value the future generations, but it's very hard, especially in the situation of Ukraine with a very low wage level, with a very low quality of life, to explain, to sell people why we have to value that, why we have to pay for that. So basically what we expect in terms of benefits, we in long term, a part of saving the planet, we expect better health, higher productivity, new technologies that will change our patterns and be more both environmentally safe, but also will create new businesses. It creates opportunities for organic agriculture, for businesses who will solve the problems that we face in the climate now. But at the same time, it means costs, and really very, very large costs for ensuring that our business is climate neutral. We have already discussed that, and I'm very happy to hear that Darina said about the plans to establish fund, because yes, it is about funding these opportunities, and Ukraine is not in as good position as our neighbors, not only the Eastern European members of the EU, but also, for example, Western Balkans, that will have much better access to the funding from the European Union. Ukraine is not expecting to get these funds, and that makes additional pressure for our business in the short-term decisions, which is unfortunately the reality. It's very hard to convince the business that in 50-year time they will gain. It's not the Ukrainian reality. Our business is not planning for 50 years, and I'm afraid that it's not even the reality for developed people. So basically, this is a major challenge, costs, and the implementation of association agreement in terms of environmental things, like the emissions of large combustion plants, show that very nicely. And about CBAM, what we saw from the leaked documents is that Ukraine is very unlikely to get the waiver. Yes, we can use some of the opportunities to prove that we are lower, we have less carbon than the default level. But basically what we see that unless we are full-scale partners in this emission trading scheme, as we saw for Norway and other European Economic Area countries, that there is no other, apart of very small countries, opportunity to avoid that. And the question is what we will see. I'm not sure that we're able to increase the carbon tax to the level that EU has. As far as I understood, the EU has its 50 euros per ton, that Ukraine has less than €1 per ton, 1/3 of that, 1/3 of euro, so it's much, much less. And the question that at least in the first wave of CBAM, it targets products that are not unique for the European Union. Metallurgy, first of all, it's not the product that we sell only there. They sell that worldwide and use domestic. I would expect that we see strong reorientation rather than the attempt to increase drastically the carbon neutrality in order to access the EU. Gradually, that will change, or it will change for some very new innovative enterprises. But basically, I would expect reorientation rather than the drive for greener production. Definitely, domestic taxes can change, and definitely we have to increase our domestic tax, otherwise we're just paying EU this money. But how to do it correctly, and what will be the stimulus, and how to ensure that that the increased tax creates not tax evasions and corruption, but actually the real climate neutrality is a challenge that is not actually about Green Deal, but about our domestic challenges, and that we will have to solve.
Thank you. Thank you for raising questions that we will discuss and we should discuss later in upcoming events. And thank you for addressing some elephants in the room regarding costs and regarding domestic issues. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I still would like to ask Marina to summarize our discussion in 7 minutes and just to highlight who will win and who will lose within the EU and within Ukraine after the implementation of Green Deal. Then we have a very short comment of Vesta and Pan Ruben, who are authors of articles on Green Deal modernization on Vox Ukraine. And then we have a few minutes for your question. And please, Marina, tell us how do you reflect on all that we will discuss for last hour here, because it's a hot topic, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. I understand that I don't have time for a fully fledged presentation. Therefore, I will limit myself just to one comment with 2 figures. And I would like to make a disclaimer that these are purely my observations, and they do not reflect the position of Promote Ukraine or any other organization. But they somehow, my reflections, they somehow echo the position of Ukrainian side that I have heard both from representative of Ukrainian parliament, Inna Sovsun, and government representative, Pani Darina, but also Pani Veronika, and they are the following. The cost of this transition for Ukrainian economy is unbearable. And first of all, it's unbearable because the time frame is so short. Estimates say that the investment that has to be made in greening of Ukrainian economy is $245 billion. And that cost has to be borne by somebody. Ukrainian state, especially after the COVID pandemic, is not in a position to make such an investment. Therefore, to put this on business, which is barely kind of breathing, is definitely a wrong thing to do. Turning to international partners for their investment is also very problematic. Why? Because first of all, I mean, Ukrainian stance on the international arena and its credibility regarding the investment in Ukrainian economy, unfortunately, remains quite low. Therefore, there is not a big inflow of direct foreign investments in Ukrainian economy. It's the one thing. And another thing, again, international investors are also kind of shrinking their budgets for just the investments with long-term benefits. Therefore, both domestically and internationally, making this effort is incredibly difficult. And second figure that I promised is that, yes, Ukrainian GDP per person or per capita is estimated at the level of 3,000 euros per year, while in EU, of course, it really depends on the country, but it is roughly 30,000 euros per person per capita. So we see that 10 times difference. The difference is 10 multifold. And therefore, again, making the political commitment, which our government has already done. I mean, we were very fast to react and to say, you know, Ukraine is interested, we will be on a course of, you know, implementation of Green Deal and everything. Political ambition is very good, but economic reality is something very different. And therefore, the goal should be to make the political ambitions and economic realities compatible with each other. First, we have to understand what would be the mechanisms financing this transition. And afterwards, we have to calculate what would be the realistic goals or achievements, and not vice versa, to first commit to very ambitious goals and yet be struggling with then financing this, because otherwise Ukraine will be on track into economic collapse, and that will, of course, not help the cause. I apologize again for probably this murky picture, but that's all I had to say in this few minutes time. Thank you.
Thank you. And you were like the briefest here. Veronika, you would like to comment? Yes?
Yeah, just very briefly. I think that it would be very interesting to see these explanation for $245 billion estimate, because it's, frankly, it sounds exaggerated. It sounds really exaggerated, and I not fully share your concern that we should first do all calculations and then do commitments. The most of changes that Green Deal offers actually the commitments included in the association, not most, but a lot. It's commitments included in the association agreement. The changes has been ongoing, and many of them have been absorbed. So, and also one more thing, whatever we want to commit or we do not want to commit, this process has started. If we would just sit and wait before we do something, and we'll just enter in, not in the first train, but in the first wagon of this train, but in the last wagon of this train, because actually we cannot leave the planet. This Green Deal is not, it has protectionism elements for sure, but basically it is driven by a very acute need to change climate policy globally. Whatever Ukraine wants to, do not want, it will have to adapt to that. The course and planning taken early, given the strategic decision, will definitely help to resolve that. So, sorry, I'm very brief, but that's my personal reflection to what I heard.
But actually, it's a mean of discussion to hear and just to address and follow and commit on what you've heard. I would like to give floor to Vesta Malolitneva. She is an author of a very interesting article published at Vox Ukraine website about the effect of Green Deal on procurement system. It's very important for Ukraine right now because we have this almost Facebook scandal, but still it can become the huge one regarding the building of road around Kiev, which is actually under of procurement system here. So Vesta, what can you say about this effect on Green Deal procurement? And then you have only 2 minutes, unfortunately, but we still are very eager to hear from you. So please.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want to make like a small comment as I do research on more strategic use of public procurement in Ukraine. I would like to stress on like the opportunities of using public procurement to achieve goals within our obligations according to the association agreement and Green Deal. I think that the main problem in Ukraine that we achieve public procurement in a very narrow way. Just as a mean to achieve like the more economical use of our state funds. However, according to its potential, as we know that public procurement in Ukraine constitutes almost 13% of GDP, we can use it in a more strategic way. So we made some positive steps, very important steps by enacting a new version of the law of Ukrainian public procurement, which provides new instruments to have like a green public procurement in Ukraine. However, without like a connection of public procurement with programs of social economic development of Ukraine, it can cause just like a formal effect. Like without a new understanding, without new approaches to public procurement in Ukraine, I think that there will be no positive results. However, like in the European Union, public procurement constitutes a very important means of achieving different goals. For example, by in the action plan of achieving like circular economy, in biodiversity strategy, and so on and so forth. Like in Ukraine, achieves it's just like as a means of economical use of state funds. So I think that we should change these approaches. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And please, Ruben, join us. Your article is devoted to the Green Deal modernization program for Ukraine. I encourage you to write it down. We will share a link with all the participants. You will find it in the description to this video. Please, Ruben Stuber, tell us what do you think about Green Deal modernization for Ukraine?
Thanks a lot. Well, First of all, thanks to the panelists for this really excellent presentations. And I'd actually like to make a point besides the green modernization, also on climate policy, the topic that Lesia mentioned before, and as some of the speakers have pointed out, there's this kind of problem of short-term decision-making process in Ukrainian politics. There's just not this tradition of having a long-term view. So basically, Ukraine has a commitment problem in committing to long-term policies that are needed in the climate sphere, and also on the other hand, the influence of large stakeholders, or if you like to call them oligarchs, on the political and decision-making process is a problem, and market concentration. And I think climate diplomacy can address this problem of especially the commitment problem through formulating a more prominent and more strategic climate policy that gives, on the one hand, more streamlining of international climate finance, but attached to it conditionalities that help Ukrainian politics to commit to a more long-term policies and more ambitious policy as well, because we can see that at least in parts of Ukrainian politics, the ambition is there and the political will is there to put forward more ambitious policies. But yeah, I think just to reiterate, such a climate policy, climate diplomacy with conditionalities can help Ukraine to commit to these policies, and also to say to other big stakeholders from the economy that well, if we commit to this, we have this advantage of more international finance. And on green modernization, I'd just like to make a more general point that it's important to think different instruments not as a single instruments, but as a whole concept. And there are like three main areas where Ukraine should advance with reforms. One is better regulation, so regulatory changes in the energy markets, especially the electricity market. The other thing is increasing the carbon price. Of course, this is politically difficult, and also we have to think about social consequences for low-income households. But we still believe that I still believe that if you have targeted social protection, it's definitely more efficient than subsidizing, for example, energy bills for everyone. And actually, it might also be save money to have only targeted social protection and not general subsidies. And last of all, streamlining climate finance. And I definitely agree that some sort of climate fund or green modernization fund, however you like to call it, has to be a cornerstone. And yeah, just to reiterate, this could be supported by the EU with a more prominent and a more
yeah, thank you. Actually, some of these recommendations are very universal. We're very eager to promote the idea of better governance here and better regulation in every sector, not only in energy and environmental policy. We have two questions just to close up this discussion, but not the whole topic. I would like to address one we've already heard about, instruments of financial and political support from the EU in order for Ukraine to move with Green Deal. But now I would like to address them to our European partners, to maybe Lesia and Charlie. You can comment, what do you think? Which kind of instruments will be the most effective and should be in place in order to support us here? Maybe Pani Lesia?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. It was very interesting to hear different perspectives. This is what makes this discussion even more interesting. I just want to make a very brief comment to the general approach of Marina and then the comment of Veronika. It's my opinion that the question to Ukraine is not whether to do it. It's clear that Ukraine has to do it, because it's not because of the EU, it's not because of any external pressure, it's because Ukrainians need to breathe clean air. They don't want to suffocate, they don't want to pay for medical care of these people. Ukrainian exporters need to have the markets. So these things are very basic, but they have to be explained to the Ukrainians. And then you have this bottom-up approach when people who really actually understand that they want their children to have asthma, they would say, we want to shut down the mine. And then it's up to the government and up to those people negotiating and deciding, together with the government, hopefully, how to develop a policy to make it happen. So this is just to sum up very briefly on this. There is no question for me. It's just the question is how to do it. So here I think that it's up to the Ukrainian government to be on board and to negotiate, because if you're not present on the table, the decisions are being taken without you. So you need to present your opinion. You need to first decide on your opinion internally, just to communicate through all channels with one voice, and then you deliver it. You deliver to the EU institutions, you deliver it to the member states, you deliver to any relevant stakeholders, and you see and present how you want to happen. And then you find a compromise in the middle. This is the diplomacy, this is politics. But this is something which Ukraine must do, and it should have started doing it. I'm sure it was doing it earlier, but it should keep on doing it now when, for example, CBAM will be negotiated. CBAM will not be withdrawn, it will be there. So Ukraine has to be there present to voice its concerns or propose constructive solutions. So I encourage the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian politicians, to come and talk to people in Brussels and come and talk to people in the EU member states. And also I encourage back in Ukraine to have more debate. It was mentioned by Komisov soon that it has to be there, the debate about the Green Deal, because eventually it will come to their real life, to the price of, I don't know, electricity or whatever. And then coming back to your question about the instruments, I think that there are some instruments which are already there. This is the MFF instrument of Global Europe, which has been changed and remodeled for the new multi-annual financial framework. And there Ukraine has its part. It has the money which has been committed as a national program for Ukraine, and it's very often up to the Ukrainian government to decide on which it wants to spend this money. So if Ukrainian government considers this to be a priority, it just signalizes it to the European Commission, European External Action Service, and while preparing the national plans, it says, look, we want European Union to help us on this and that in reaching our Green Deal goals. And then this is the existing instrument. And then if this fund is being created, which I think is a very, very good idea, and there was a question about the conditionality. It's very likely that the fund is going to be linked to the traditional foreign policy, to the mechanisms which are being used in the foreign policy of the EU. And these are the conditionalities on the reforms. So it might sound a little bit random, but multi-annual financial assistance to Ukraine was linked on the reform of the judiciary. And it might happen for the funds to be it created or not. So I think that Ukraine has to bear in mind this approach of the foreign policy instruments of the EU. And I think the idea of financing it from different sources, both international partners like EU, but also complementing it with the private financing is really good, because if the investors see some stability coming from the EU, which is already inserted in the fund, I think that they would feel encouraged to join. And last point, it's about the Ukrainian starting points. You have to see as well the glass half full, not half empty. Ukraine has good chances in reaching its goals for whatever reason it is, because of the reference point is not the year 90 when the Ukrainian, we all know the story, but leaving the story aside, Ukraine has a good chance to show globally that we are there, we are committing and we are delivering. And I think Ukraine is not selling enough the story to the outside world. And it's very easy to make improvements in energy efficiency with not so much investment in Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not an expert, but just as a common sense, because the level of energy efficiency is very low. So you just by making a little bit of effort, you reach very good results, and Ukraine has to capitalize on these opportunities. And I will finish here.
Thank you. I think the good sign and like the sign of a good discussion is that we have a parallel one with the comments between our panelists. So you can please see about the numbers and figures and all the stuff between Marina, Veronica, Darina, and other panelists. We have only 2 minutes, just final closing remarks. Maybe some of our panelists would like to tell us something more. If not, maybe, or just raise your hand. No, okay, everyone is just, okay, Charlie, yeah, please, the first source, you will be the last one.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, because I'm not completely sure if we have a common understanding here. The Green Deal doesn't mean that the Ukraine has to be climate neutral by 2050. Not even all European countries have to be climate neutral by 2050. That's why we have a common goal for all of the EU. So if you look also at the Paris Agreement, it says that the NDCs have to be determined reflecting common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities in the light of different national circumstances. So I think when Europe judge the ambition of the Ukrainian climate plans, that will be taken into account. So I think that the 2060 climate neutrality goal seems like an adequate one, which gives at least a bit more of time. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. In this portion of optimism and the end of the discussion, we have a few submitted questions. I'm not sure actually whether some of our panelists could professionally address them, because it's devoted to the corporate governance reform and defense. But I promise you that we put in touch your questions with our panelists and speakers, and hope they can provide you written answers. Thank you for such a structured and detailed, insightful, and very frank presentation information from all of our speakers. I'm sure we will elaborate on these questions in our upcoming events, because this is a very long, hard, but very needed process for all the parties. And stay tuned. Please follow Vox Ukraine, Promote Ukraine, and help us move Ukraine closer to EU. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The meeting is over, and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a great